When sewing in faux leather, or in real leather for that matter, you can't use pins. Therefore I've bought some clips to use instead of pins, because if you use pins in the leather, you will make a hole that won't disappear. I have 2 darts in the back, so I'll start with those. I'm sewing the pocket now. The tape is not enough. I'm not sure how to... It's slipping. No, I'll just skip the pocket altogether. Okay, so now I just put the side pieces together. It is a bit crooked. I realize I really need a presser foot for leather sewing, so I ordered one, and in the meantime, while waiting for that to arrive, I'm going to start with the shirt. So I made a pattern and tested it a lot, so I know it works. And this is the fabric. It's a simple cotton fabric with stripes. And since it has stripes, I will be very careful of the placement of the pattern pieces when cutting it out. I'm going to sew the bottom placket, and I just folded it twice according to my markings. Let's sew the shoulder seams and then continue with the collar. I'm basically pressing each time I've sewn something. So I sew a seam, then press it. So this is the ruffle for the collar. I pressed it in the middle, and now I'm going to close the sides and then give it another press. And then I will stitch gathering stitches along the edge, so I can gather up the fabric and pin it to the collar. I may need to clip a little bit into the seam allowance of the shirt. So I pressed the seam allowance up into the collar. Now I will fold the inner collar over the stitching line, just barely over the stitching line, but enough to cover it. Then I will pin from the right side. And when I've done that, I will top stitch. I'm very happy with this color. So next up I'm going to quickly sew the side seams together and then continue with the sleeves. Right side of sleeve placket towards wrong side of sleeve. So now I'm going to sew along this line 5mm seam allowance all the way around, then cut it in the middle and in this kind of Y shape, and then I'm going to fold it to the other side, and then I'll show you the next step from there. Five millimeter fold, and then fold again. Five millimeter fold again, and don't forget the upper side. Now this is getting folded over as well. And then in the end, the idea is that this will cover up this part. At first I will sew this part very close to the folded edge. Then I'll sew this edge and around and end in a square. Now I'm sewing the cuffs, and they are basically exactly the same as the collar. I just have to pin the pleats before I can attach the cuffs. So the process is exactly as attaching the collar. I'll pin this all the way around, sew it with 1 centimeter seam allowance, fold it over, pin it from the right side, and top stitching it in place. There isn't much left to do. I'm going to attach the sleeves. Then I'm going to hem it, and I will just fold it twice and sew closely to the folded edge. And then the last step is just button and buttonholes, and it's done. I've got my new presser foot and I tried it and it works like a charm. So now finally I can continue with the waistcoat. Now it's time to top stitch all the seams, and then I will close the shoulder seams. It turned out great. I'm really happy with this. So I'll continue top stitching when necessary. It's a bit tricky sewing the leather and the lining together because the lining is slippery, it's very thin and flimsy, and the leather is, well, it is plastic, so it has a sort of, not sticky, but there's some resistance to the surface. So I will start with the neckline, understitch it, then continue with the arm side, and then lastly I will sew the back piece. Now I will close the side seams. I'm going to top stitch all the edges. We have a buttonhole. It's a little wobbly, but I think I'll just be happy I could make a buttonhole to begin with, because I really didn't think that would work. It's time to start on the coat. So I'll start with sewing the front pieces, the back pieces, top stitching them, and then continue with the collar. I had some material I couldn't ease into the seam because on the grain line it's not stretchy at all, not one bit. So I wasn't able to ease it in as I would have normally, but I don't know what to do about it. I guess I just cut it a bit before I put the facings on. No worries. I think the collar and the sleeves will be the most difficult parts in making this coat. I'm going to make a cut here so I can turn this and sew the rest of the collar. When sewing the side seam, I'm closing the sleeve as well. I have to do this in the right order for everything to fit nicely. So this is the back piece. I put in a movement pleat for my comfort, and I also left an opening for when I'm going to turn. I'm going to bagline the coat, so I need somewhere to turn everything right side out again. So now the next step is to sew the side front to the back, and when I've done that I need to sew the hem facing. So I prepared this. This is center back. So I will sew this to the back pieces and the side front. And once that is done, I can fold this over as much as needed and then sew the front facing to the lining. So these will line up, and this has a bit of an overhang, and that's how it should be, also for movement purposes. And then separately I will sew the sleeve facings to the coat, and then lastly I will attach the lining to the coat and the sleeve lining to the sleeve facing. I'm making progress with lining. When I made the pattern, I made the sleeve facings exactly the same size as the shell, but since this fabric is rather difficult to work with, I sewed with 1.5 centimeter seam allowance instead of 1 centimeter. So this is smaller than the shell. That means when I put it in, it will fit the hole instead of being too wide and bunching up and making folds where they're not supposed to be. So hopefully this will work and the seam will be nice and even and have no puckering. These are the shoulder pads. They are 1.5 centimeters thick, and it turns out this is the perfect size for this coat. I don't have to trim it anything. So I pinned it in place. It's difficult to show you how it's done because I have to be like very close and in the coat almost. So my plan is to sew this by hand, just some large stitches along the seam allowance. You don't want the shoulder pad to end at the seam. You want it to end around here, maybe a centimeter or so, half a centimeter further from the edge. I'm going to join the outer shell with the lining, and since I have these seams, I need to start with the collar because I need to cut into the seam allowance to be able to continue with the seam. And it's important to fold down the collar because you're supposed to sandwich it between the layers. So I will be able to sew from this point to this point. Then I need to stop, cut into the seam allowance, and then I can continue. This time I can sew all the way out, stopping at the seam allowance. I'm going to mark this point as well and sew from this side again since I already have a seam here. I want to close both center fronts before I handle the hem. Then I will sew the sleeves, and then when everything is done I will close the lining, and I will do that by hand. So here's the sleeve facing, and here's the lining. So these two are supposed to be sewn together. So I will put a clip in it so I don't get it twisted around. And then I'll reach for it through the hole in the lining. Here it is. And between the lining and the shell fabric. And then I get a hold of it. I will sew this as usual. 1 centimeter seam allowance, and then hopefully when I pull it back out I will have a lined sleeve. I will put in these small pieces of fabric in the seam allowance of the sleeve to make it stay in place. So even though you pull out of the sleeve, the lining will stay put. I will top stitch all edges, including the sleeves and the collar. And in the hem, the lining is longer for movement reasons, so I need to first top stitch this edge, and then I will make a few stitches in the ditch of a few seams just to make the facing lie flat and still, and the lining can then just drop down below it